Good afternoon. My name's Dave Peterson, and I'm here with Mike Nantz from Denton, Texas. He's one of our masters, and he's here today to talk about architectural elements from concept to construction. Mike, welcome to the show.
Yeah, good to be here, Dave.
Good. So you and I talk about design quite a bit. I think
Yep.
you ask me more questions about engineering because
a couple.
I'm that kind of a geek.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
as you know, I'm a fan of architecture as well.
Yep.
And so here we are talking about architectural stuff and how that influences water, maybe influences your design work.
Oh, definitely so. Yeah.
Is there anything in particular about architecture that you like, it, how it affects your pool design?
You know, no matter where we work, it always affects the design. Given, architects have it, they've got it good. They get to problem solve on the front end. They get to walk into a blank slate in most occasions where there's nothing there, and they want to, again, solve those problems and build those structures and satisfy the client, and to bring some of their design influences into the overall process. But we as pool guys, we show up and there's generally a house already there, and so that's the architecture, and that's the thing that we have to, that we've got to marry into and contribute to and create this seamless interface, if you will, and so yeah, absolutely. My design is always influenced by the surrounding architecture.
Yeah, one of my favorite architects is Louis Barragan, who, I think was quoted as saying that there should be no distinction between architecture, landscape, and the garden, I think was the way that he phrased it. And I think you're kind of hinting to that sort of an approach to the projects, that things should be thought out, integrated as a complete piece. The pool shouldn't look like it's outside.
Added later, right? Yeah, more of a master plan,
So how do you start that process, though? If we're talking about, from concept to construction, how do you approach a project when you walk into a yard and the house is already there?
Yeah. So it's the simple things. The site clients oftentimes will do that, especially far away clients. Consultation stuff that I do in other states, other countries. They'll call and say, we'd like for you to come and do something for us. And so what's the next step? And my first reply is always, I've got to come there. I've got to see the space. And so those things such as elements and the exterior features, the materials, the color palette, the vistas, all of these traffic patterns, all of those things come into play almost immediately. So the site speaks to you. So that architectural element that's there, for instance, you mentioned Barragan, and within his work was quite interesting. He did a lot of play on water and color. He was a wonderful colorist as well. But he integrated, as you were mentioning earlier, the water and architecture together. And sometimes it was as simple as creating an overhead runnel detail that you couldn't normally. You look down at a runnel, but he would create some sort of channel overhead and would drop it in dramatic fashion into a water feature. But most of Barragan's work, as you know, was back in the 50s, and beyond that. And of course, I can't recall when he died, but I want to say he worked maybe all the way up into the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. But so the swimming pool wasn't an impetus for his design work. His was watering horses in South America and in Mexico. And so some of his work is just absolutely dramatic in that he was doing perimeter overflow horse troughs in the 1950s, and as you said before, we've talked before, we came on here, and that's some of the pool guys think they really created something with the perimeter overflow, and excuse me, it's been done before.
Right. Yeah, he was very good with light too.
Yeah.
And
well, that's the color aspect of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and his use of windows, clear story windows and things like that to bring in light into spaces and change rooms depending on the time of the day. And light actually fascinates me now because we have so much new technology in that area and the ability to do lighting in our pools like we've never been able to do before.
Yeah.
And you get involved with landscape lighting. I don't do a lot of landscape lighting. How does that tie in, in terms of architecture and?
Yeah. Again, the site speaks to you. So the architecture is there. It's identifying those elements that need that the nighttime pop of light. And so that's oftentimes I see that in the classes that we teach, for instance, within Genesis. And you get that question of all the daytime visuals, but the nighttime is oftentimes overlooked, more than not. And so, yeah, I mean, it's identifying the spots, knowing how to light, whether it's uplight, downlight, or side light, all of these different times. It could be backdrop, it can be silhouetted. There's just a myriad of different lighting techniques that you use. But certainly the landscape lighting is a piece that definitely goes into my design overall quiver, arrow in my quiver. So to the specifics of what do you design, the site speaks to you. I mean, it really does. If it's not in view, then obviously it doesn't need to be, but sometimes things are in view, but they disappear at night. And a simple little incandescent, even, LED today, but a simple light in that particular distance, for instance, can increase the depth of field in a particular view from a corridor from within the house. So there's a lot of little fun things to do with the nighttime view for sure.
Yeah. So you mentioned depth of field, and that relates a lot to scale. And we haven't talked a lot about scale. We haven't talked about it at all yet. But obviously, when you go into a backyard and you've got this existing structure, scale is one of the first things you have to think about.
Right.
Is the pool going to be this big, or is it going to be this big? So how do you approach that from a design standpoint?
Yeah, proportion is everything, for sure. If you just think about it from pool design, our standard spa, for instance, is 7 foot diameter. Let's call it as a standard normal spa. If we took that 7 foot diameter spa and plopped it into a 12 foot long swimming pool, it'd look kind of out of proportion, right? So the scale would be off. And so yeah, I mean, as far as how to, it's again one of those learned techniques of what's proper in that particular space. And I oftentimes say that to the client as well. If we make something small back here and conservative, it may be a postage stamp, in the overall scheme. But if we take it to the proper size in accordance to the architecture and also the vista and the overall landscape, trying to achieve some balance there in the overall aspect of the view in the master plan. So yeah, it's getting the proportions right. I don't know if that answers your question on scale.
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, talking about water and architecture and scale and pools in particular, if you think about falling water, I don't think the pool at falling water is all that large.
Really small.
But for me, my interpretation is that when I look at the way that the home is designed and constructed, there's sort of a series of boxes and cantilevers and things.
Yep.
And that just sort of, the pool, although it is small, feels like one more of those boxes that's sort of fitting into the scale of everything. So it's not that the pool is in scale with the overall structure. It's more like it's in correct scale with certain elements of the structure.
Well, you take it into context as well, because there you have the river. Yeah. The river is the feature. Although you have to leave the confines of the house to go out to appreciate and look back was a contrarian view, as Wright was known to be anyway, as a true contrarian. But the existing swimming pool that's there, it was more of a decadent touch. I mean, you just didn't have swimming pools in 1936. But so that was just sort of a decadent touch that he added to the space. But you're exactly right. Scale, proportion, it all worked, and it was tucked in. It wasn't out in the open like the river is, for instance. Now, on the other hand, with Baragon, his features were typically large because they had to accommodate many horses, and he did a lot of paved courtyards too, the things that are just really big. And what I found interesting about some of his, not only in terms of details of what we try to use today, and I mentioned the horse troughs, the perimeter overflow horse troughs. He took then and applied that same edge detail to just open watering troughs, if you will. So it wasn't a confines that was completely visible. There was no vertical containment of the water. He would just ramp or beach entry down into a place where the horses could just walk down into the water as they would in a lake. So I would venture to guess that's where his influence came from. He sees them do that in a lake, in the ocean, in rivers, whatever. Why don't we do that, recreate that in and around the house, and again, make it architecturally correct? And the way he connected it was through papers that came to the house, out to that. And so, and it all worked. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to grab that scale and to get it. And but yeah, in both of those instances, perfectly well done.
Yeah, so he was bringing something that he saw in nature and incorporating that in architecture.
Which water element is a natural element, so why not?
Yeah. And John Lautner did a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, his organic architecture was, you know, he was fitting the structures to be part of the environment. Are there any influences with John Lautner that have, you know, found their way into your projects over time?
Yeah, I think so. And again, you know, this was in early, I want to say it was 92, 93 when Tischerman did Goldstein, the Goldstein residence, which was Sheets Goldstein is the name of the house. And it was a John Lautner design that John was brought in by Mr. Goldstein in the early 90s to rehab that. And at the time, I was mentoring with David Tischerman, and was able to come to LA and visit that job site during the construction process. And at that time, I had never seen a perimeter overflow. And this was pre-Genesis, by the way. Obviously, Genesis kicked off in 98. So David did this one with some specific details, but that grabbed me. You know, first time ever seeing a swimming pool water level at the same level as the deck. And so I could go on and on and on about that house, but one of those things, now that I mentioned the deck, and I won't go on and on about the house, but in terms of how it relates to the swimming pool, another great detail that they did there that I tried to pull off with a client of mine, and it didn't fly. So the water level and the deck level were the same. They had a 1-inch slot that David had installed, and that all worked just fine. The deck continued out. And you get out to the perimeter of the deck, and the deck was the house was on a steep hillside, and is on a steep hillside, and the deck had no railing around the perimeter. You go over to the edge of the deck, and you look down. That's a 20-foot drop in some places, 30, 40 feet in others. I don't know how you got that through safety code and whatnot, but the great detail was something as simple as slant the deck or ramp the deck up towards the perimeter going up. So whenever you moved in that area, you were significant you could feel the elevation with your feet. And there was no need for a fence. That slope actually ran from horizontal, started the vertical, and over that vertical span is probably about 4 feet. So yeah, it's 2 good strides in basically going uphill to go off the edge. Well, you didn't go. You got up and you felt that incline and you stayed away. Well, I pitched that to a client a few years later, and they were like, no. And it's because sometimes I have an opportunity to work where there are no inspections. You know, I live in Texas, and of course I do work all over, but within Texas it's wide open spaces, and you can do whatever the heck you want, wherever you want to, as long as it's, you obviously got to live with it at the end of the day. But it was one of those situations where there's no inspection, but the client said no. But yeah, going back to your question, your original question of, does Lautner's work, has any of that influenced me? It absolutely has. And the clean, we use that term organic, and in my mind, organic brings forth landscape and undulating ground and rock and that type of stuff. And that was one of the amazing things about Lautner, is he was able to marry those together, and but still with a very modern sense and sensibility, in being able to take the glass and concrete the way that he did and marry it to the overall space of the organic nature of things. And he did a lot of hillside stuff, and he did it with such style and beauty that it's just amazing. But anyway, he's certainly, there's been an influence on my work.
Yeah. Well, one thing about architecture that I think is misunderstood by a lot of people is that there's a sales component to that if you're coming up with original ideas, you have to sell that concept
Oh,
to the
sure.
client. And, sometimes that's easier. Obviously, you said it didn't work. You were trying to sell this idea to a client. And so I'm wondering, how do you, are there any tools in your bag that you use to help you sell a concept, especially something that they haven't seen or maybe has only been done once before?
Yeah. For years I relied on just drawing skills. That was the main thing, is just to be able to draw something in some semblance of fashion to communicate the idea to the client. And whether it's a section, whether it's perspective, whatever it is, but being able to bring that forth on paper is so critically important. Today we have models. We have computer-aided rendering programs, and I've even made the conversion myself. I work a lot in SketchUp, and so creating those 3D models really simplifies that aspect. It's still same amount of time. There was a time when I would put 15 to 25 hours into a presentation, and I would take that single sheet presentation, one particular view, and frame it and take it to the client in a big 24 by 36 portfolio and show it to them, and they were always wowed by that. But then they would say, okay, what happens over there on the back? Well, you're just gonna have to trust me on that one. Well, today we can just spin that model around backwards, upside down, look under it if you want. There's just all sorts of ways. So those tools are very, very helpful. But within all of that, though, Dave, it's where you are in your career, where I am in mine, is the confidence and competence of being able to present something. So the client can, especially the higher end clients, they're self-made most of the time, and they can sniff out a scam when they see one coming, and you can't go in there and just BS your way through it. You have to know what you're talking about. You've got to be able to back it up, and you've got to bring that competent piece to the table before you consider presenting anything out of the norm to the client. Well, anything as a matter of fact, but especially with what we're talking about, marrying these two things together and having some experience in both genres, I think is terribly important to create that level of competence.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you've got some inspiration. We talked about Barragan, Lautner, Frank Lloyd Wright. You're using drawing as one of your tools. You're working kind of as a salesman, pitching these concepts, and now you've got the contract, you've got your design, at least your conceptual design done. Maybe your construction documents aren't done, and now you're starting to work towards the end of this, which is the build. How do you get from that point? Obviously, drawings would be next, and maybe you could tell me what your process is now.
Yeah. I think you're baiting me in to tell people that I use you to help me bring some of those concepts together.
You've only used me a couple times. That's why you're in trouble all the time.
I'm a slow learner. But but that's what comes to mind when you ask that question. That's the next step, is once all the conceptual stuff's done. And again, just to refer back to one particular project recently that you've helped me with, and that's exactly what we did. I showed up at the client's house. Well, first they gave me all of their descriptives of what they want, and very seldom, by the way, do my clients come out and say, okay, I want a spa here, and I want an edge detail over there, and I want a waterfall over here. I very seldom get that, and I usually ask them, don't give me that. Just tell me what you'd like to see and experience, and let me, because this is what I do, and you don't know what you can have. And I try to say that in a non-arrogant way, because I know what you can have. You don't. But anyway, I take that, and we created a plan. I came back, and again, I'm such a slave to the modern age, and I hate the fact that I'm getting further and further away from my pencil. But I show up at the house with a 32-inch monitor tucked under my arm. And by the way, it fits right here, just exactly. I walk in. And so I used to walk in with a 36-inch portfolio, and now I come in with a monitor. Set it up, and I set them up in front of the TV, and I, with my mouse, I'm over there. I'm over behind them, talking to them about what they're seeing. What used to be people were looking over my shoulder. And now I've put them in a different position. Now they're watching TV, which we all do, on a big screen on the table right in front of them. And I show them this model. And 10 minutes in, the client looks over his shoulder and he said, "Mike, you knocked it out of the park. This is great." And of course, that's wonderful to hear from somebody who's about to spend $700,000 with you. So anyway, so we take that, and then I've got all these ideas on paper now, and I ship them out to you. And Dave, I've got these ideas, and here's what I want, and you hand me off to one of your team members because apparently you don't know how to do it. And we get that.
I'm working on the $800,000 job. There's just only 7.
I got it. So, but those guys will help me take those ideas where I'm borrowing from the architecture. Or even in this case, we had in this particular project, we had an issue at the house that we were so close to it that I was alarmed because I know house construction. And so I was alarmed by the proximity. So I called Jake and talked to you, and we wound up making some changes, came up with several ideas, and ultimately we moved the pool. But there were ideas, again, that you guys presented and offered to us, and kind of helped get us over the hump. And then, again, other architectural elements that I had in and around the pool that, for instance, spanning the grotto was 12 foot across, and I didn't want a support post. And again, just to sell the idea, to get a better idea of what a grotto is, and just a big cavernous opening. And you were able to design the slab to carry the load. We talked about deflection recently and how we're going to veneer it. So all of those things, again, it's I may be a one-man show, but in terms of my company, but it takes a team of good, competent people, such as yourself and Water Shapes Consulting to kind of help bring it all together. Mm-hmm. Definitely got to have you.
And then, so now bringing those from paper into the field, you know, are there, if you're just thinking about sort of architectural details and bringing those into the field, are there challenges that you run into trying to explain, you know, to a mason that you're looking for a certain finish or quality or level of precision that maybe they're not used to?
Yeah.
But it's necessary for that particular element to be pulled off the way you want it?
Yeah, I think that what jumps to mind immediately is usually whenever I have a tight interface between the water element and the architecture itself. I'm a big fan of and I say this, I want to say this with caution, because I don't like trends, I don't like styles, I don't like to be known for, oh, he does that, and he does that really well, and he does that everywhere, whether you like it or not. I don't want to be that, but I am a big fan of floating architecture on water. I personally just love that, and if the site offers it, I'll present it to the client. And what I mean by that is existing architecture or stuff that we're going to add to. And so whenever you do that, you bring that water element to a dry element, such as a building that I'm going to reside in or have a drink in or have a barbecue in, whatever. That's an exacting process through there, and that takes close attention to detail, that interface, that junction between the two, transition, if you will. And so, yeah, that's one of the major concerns. And a few other other concerns too, are what I was mentioning earlier about Baragon, how you would project an overhead runnel into the swimming pool. Sometimes requires a posting mechanism, you know, out into the swimming pool to pull off the overall effect. And now you've got a rigid architectural structure, semi-rigid, and then you've got the rigid swimming pool down below, and they're both founded in different. You don't know what the house is founded in, and you're making this rigid connection between the two, and there's going to be movement. It's going to be deflection, there's going to be expansion, contraction, it's going to be all of these things. And so, again, engineering helps me figure all those types of things out, but those are challenges for sure. Mm-hmm.
Is there any particular project or detail in your portfolio that you know that you could sort of tie to a particular architect, or, you know, from an influence standpoint, and that, you know, maybe was a challenge to pull off all the way through? You
know, the first one, it's funny you mentioned falling water, wasn't a challenge. It was a challenge to convince the client it was okay. But the first time that I ever addressed a set of stairs running the length of the swimming pool was a Frank Lloyd Wright detail in that pool that you're talking about, that he did in the 1930s. And it's almost prolific now, but whenever you have a tight space consideration, whenever the pool's not very big, a standard set of stairs flowing out into the pool is sometimes it just doesn't make good sense. So taking what we would normally call a bench down one length of the pool or one end of the pool, but do that bench in 3 levels and match the stair configuration or progression that we normally would build. Did that very early in my career, but again, I stole it from Falling Water. Again, David Tischerman and I had gone to Falling Water early in my career, probably in the mid 90s, and we visited there, and I remember seeing that set of steps and went, that's interesting. Never seen that before. And I brought that in and was able to get it in. Again, challenging to the client, they couldn't understand it. But again, I was able to draw it real quick, and they went, oh, interesting as well, and we built it.
I like that detail too, because when I make them, 3 or 4 feet long, they're really a series of benches at different levels. They're not just steps, so they're multifunctional. And oftentimes, when done on the wall parallel to maybe a vanishing edge, now you're really setting up a series of places to sit and just look out across that water and really get that idea that there is no edge to it. You're at the end of the world.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Talking not particular architects, but another detail that I brought home from my travels was the runnel detail that you see in mosques throughout Spain. And I'd gone into there and into my first mosque, and there's that center courtyard fountain, and then all these lines of water projecting off back into the residence itself, that they use for cooling, and the whole 9 yards, and obviously for drinking water. But and since I saw that, again, I came home and I've got to figure out a way, some place. And again, it's all about the site. What does the site call for? And my first endeavor with that particular detail was I was retained to do a remodel on a 1970s pool behind a house that was built in also the 70s, but it was a very I call it kind of a hacienda. Matter of fact, it was named Hacienda something. I've forgotten the name of it. Anyway, I was able to bring that. The pool was just a big 30 by 60 diving pool, and that was it, sitting alone all by itself. And I was able to add a water feature at the house and flow a runnel detail all the way out too. And again, it was that same Moorish influence in Spanish architecture or in Mediterranean style architecture. So I was able to bring that in as well. Again, nothing that's just super wow, nobody does that, but it's just those types of things that influenced me throughout my career.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else you want to talk about in regards to bringing architecture from concept to construction?
Again, the competency of being able to present it to the client and knowing it front to back, inside and out before you even open your mouth, I think is truly important. Obviously,
especially for you.
Yeah, especially for me. It's easy to come back from travels and you've seen something that you've never done before, or you see something that sparked an idea and you just run with excitement to the next client and you force it on them. And that's what I see a lot of that in our design world, and that's typically the greenhorn designer, that or pool guy, if you will, that just doesn't have a lot of experience with it. But yeah, taking that idea, understanding it, knowing it, being able to develop it, knowing a good team to put behind it if you need it, and to bring it off, and then your subcontractors, and you've got to know more than them. In most cases that I've learned in my 30-year career, if you get out of the way, your subs will just build your job for you. Who knows what it's going to look like when it's done? Who knows if it's going to fail or not when it's done? But they'll build it for you. So you've got to know more than them, and you've got to bring that to the table. And again, the competency thing. So selling it, bringing it to fruition, knowing how to do all of that, and then finishing it off properly. And again, meeting the environmental concerns or questions or influences. Is it to replicate antiquity, or is it supposed to be more modern? And so knowing the materials that bring all of that forward as well. And so just like the hacienda that I had just mentioned, I was able to marry the old with the new, and material-wise as well, and it worked. So again, just overall front-to-back competency is really important before you tackle this type of work.
Good.
Yep.
Yeah, reaching out through education and other peers in the industry, experts in the various areas, because you're really the orchestrator of a symphony.
Well, that's it. You're exactly right. That's a good point. And Genesis is just a wonderful resource for all of that. I mean, it's we call it our resource pool, and the pun intended, because this is what we do, and there's a bunch of us, and I've yet to find something that I've seen or thought of that someone within our organization hadn't had something at least similar to that, and have crossed that threshold, and can help me get to the other side as well.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming today and talking to us about this. I really appreciate your time.
All right, man.
Good
Thank
to see you, brother.
Yeah, good seeing you.
Ask the Masters is dedicated to educating, mentoring, and designing a better workplace for the swimming pool industry and their families. Please take a moment to share, like, and review our content with all of those that would be interested.